Hey everyone and welcome. Today we're diving into a word that totally changed the game in modern warfare, Blitzkrieg. You've probably heard it. It means lightning war, and it brings up these images of just unstoppable speed, overwhelming force. But what was it really? And how in the world did it let a smaller army basically conquer a continent? Well, the answer is a fascinating story of innovation, desperation, and a completely radical new way of thinking about war.
To really get what Blitzkrieg was all about, you have to start right here, Dunkirk, 1940. Just picture it. The British army is completely shattered. You have hundreds of thousands of men trapped on the beaches of France, desperately scrambling to escape while enemy planes are just swarming overhead. It was absolute total chaos. In just 5 days, the Germans had pushed over 120 miles. I mean, the speed was just terrifying.
And this is the million-dollar question. The Allied plans had just completely fallen apart, and at the hands of an enemy that was numerically smaller. I mean, how is that even possible? How could Germany pull off a victory so total, so devastatingly quick against a bigger opponent? The answer was a brand new radical way of fighting.
And suddenly, this new word starts popping up everywhere in the British press. Blitzkrieg, lightning war. That was the name they gave to this tactic that had brought France to its knees and pushed the entire British army to the very brink of annihilation. So what exactly is it? Well, the core idea of Blitzkrieg is, and you're not going to believe this, to win by avoiding a head-on fight. It's a tactic designed for victory through dislocation. You find a weak spot in the enemy's line, you punch a hole right through it, and you just race ahead, causing absolute chaos and confusion deep behind their lines.
And his quote from John Delaney at the Imperial War Museums just nails it. You defeat them by dislocation, not destruction on the battlefield. See, it's all about paralyzing the enemy's brain, not getting into a slugfest and smashing their fist.
But an idea this out there doesn't just appear from nowhere. To really understand why Germany came up with this, we've got to rewind the clock all the way back to the end of the First World War. Because as we're about to see, Blitzkrieg was born from sheer, absolute necessity.
After World War I, the Treaty of Versailles hammered Germany. It limited their entire army to just 100,000 men. That's it. An army that once had millions of soldiers was cut down to a tiny professional force. And that restriction, well, it forced them to think way outside the box.
And this slide right here really puts it all into perspective. Germany had a measly 10 divisions. Now compare that to the French army at the time, 85 divisions strong. There was just no way Germany could win a traditional war of numbers. They simply didn't have the men. They had to innovate, or they'd be completely irrelevant.
So they got really creative. They sent troops to fight in the Spanish Civil War just to get them some real combat experience. And get this, because the treaty said no real tanks, they trained with cardboard mock-ups on cars. Seriously. And maybe most important of all, every single soldier was trained for the job of the rank above them. This created an incredibly flexible and adaptable fighting force.
Okay, so you've got this new, highly professional army. How does that thinking become the Blitzkrieg formula? Well, Germany's new tactic really boiled down to 3 key ingredients that, when you put them all together, were just almost unstoppable.
And here they are. First, you need insane speed of movement. Second, you need equally fast communication and decision-making. And third, and this is crucial, you need an overconfident enemy, someone who is totally expecting to fight a completely different kind of war. Let's break each of those down.
Now, it's a huge myth that the entire German army was this mechanized juggernaut. It wasn't. The truth is, as you can see here, only about 15% of it was. But, and this is a big but, that 15%, all the tanks and armored vehicles, was concentrated at the very tip of the spear. This meant that even if Germany was outnumbered overall, at the exact point of attack, they almost always had the advantage.
So it's all about how they used that spear tip. German junior commanders, guys right there on the front line, were actually empowered to make huge decisions in a matter of minutes. If they saw a weak spot, they could immediately change their attack to exploit it. For the Allies, a similar decision would have to go all the way up a rigid chain of command and could take days. By then, of course, it was way too late.
So why were their decisions so much faster? It really came down to technology. The Germans put radios in their tanks and with their commanders, which allowed for instant communication and coordination on the move. The Allies, on the other hand, were still basically using telephone lines, just like in World War I. All the Germans had to do was find the wire and cut it, and boom, the Allied command was completely blind.
And that brings us to that third final ingredient, an enemy stuck in the past. Look, the Allies had won the First World War, so you can kind of see their thinking. Why change a winning formula? They were all geared up to fight a slow, defensive war with trenches and attrition. They were completely, utterly unprepared for the speed and the ferocity of Blitzkrieg.
So, if Blitzkrieg was this powerful, this revolutionary, why didn't Germany win the war?
Well, as it turns out, every superweapon has a weakness. And the Allies, after that initial brutal shock, started to figure out Blitzkrieg's Achilles heel. The key to the entire Allied counter-strategy was actually pretty simple in theory. You had to take away Blitzkrieg's greatest weapon, its speed. If you could just grind the German advance to a halt and force them into a long, drawn-out fight, the whole tactic would just fall apart.
And here's the playbook they used. First, and this was absolutely the most important part, they just refused to surrender. They stayed in the fight. Then, they deliberately turned the conflict into that grinding war of attrition, a war of production. The goal became to simply outproduce Germany, leveraging the incredible industrial power, that military muscle, of allies like the United States.
And once the war became that slow, grinding contest of who could build more stuff, Blitzkrieg basically went from being a superweapon to an obsolete tool. Its effectiveness just started to evaporate, and its decline was pretty much inevitable.
This timeline pretty much shows its final chapter. It worked one last time, with devastating success, against the Soviet Union in 1941, because they hadn't learned the lessons from France yet. But fast forward to 1944, a final, desperate gamble at the Battle of the Bulge completely failed. And by 1945, the tactic that had once conquered Europe was powerless to stop Germany's final defeat.
In the end, the very things that made Blitzkrieg necessary in the first place, a small army that desperately needed a quick victory, became its downfall. Once the Allies figured out how to counter its speed and turn the war into a marathon of production, well, Germany was left holding a losing hand. It was a powerful lesson. Even the most revolutionary tactic has a shelf life.
And that leaves us with a really fascinating thought to chew on. Blitzkrieg was absolutely revolutionary, no doubt about it, but its success depended entirely on a specific set of circumstances that its enemies eventually learned to take away. So it makes you wonder, doesn't it? How often does a brilliant, game-changing idea contain the very seeds of its own destruction? Something to think about. Thanks for joining me.